Thank you very much. Really grateful to be here. So I teach a seminar in the art school for first years in the MFA program on the history and theory of graphic design. And my comments tonight are on reasons for and possible approaches to teaching history in an art school, looking at the past in a field that, like many of the ones represented here, is interested in looking forward. And those comments are under the heading of Search versus Research, which was a series of lectures given by Joseph Albers down the road at Trinity College in 1965. Albers, of course, the artist, designer, Yale, one of the longest-serving faculty members of the Bauhaus. He taught at Black Mountain College and was the chair of the design department here at Yale in the 1950s. And here he is with a young Sheila Hicks, the future fiber artist. So parenthetically, I should say this gesture, this pointing, seems to have been pedagogically very important at the time. So this could be part of a continuing series of sort of older white men pointing toward things, at things, generally sort of gesturing. And in seriousness, that is about half my job, in the sense that we are using primary materials in Yale's extraordinary collections at Beinecke, at Haas. So really, if all I did was to point and say, Beinecke is that away, that would almost be sufficient for these extraordinary designers. So his preference in the sort of titular binary of search versus research is clear. It's for the former, which he doesn't really bother to define, but only maybe in opposition to the latter, which is a kind of bad object. And I want to try to complicate that a little. I mean, Albers himself was very coy about his own influences. When asked about his artistic influences, he said, I come from my father and from Adam, and that's all. And yet he was very, very well versed in his art history. He also said, and I want to issue a kind of graphic warning here, quote, hearing teaching without being allowed to forget is like taking a meal without a stool to follow. And the substitute for the latter, regurgitating in exams, is unhealthy. And you have to imagine that in his heavily accented German, this came across really in a clinical kind of way. He continued, a lot of history leaves little room for work. The reverse, little history and much work, is our task. So I wanted to make a brief plug for a little history. So in the course, and these are students in Haas Library looking at the Paul Rand papers. Paul Rand, one of the greatest graphic designers of the 20th century. Also Yale, his papers are here. We go through primary materials in the collection, and the organizing concept is of a case study. So whenever we can have an object in our hands rather than a slide on the screen, we will. We look at really overdetermined objects, things that are manifestos both in terms of form and in terms of content. And the students make presentations and make visual and verbal arguments for them. So it's not a survey, but a seminar. We don't really have time for a survey. We don't have an interest in that kind of master narrative or a canon. The organizing concept of the last couple classes has been a case study of Muriel Cooper, a graphic designer who worked at MIT from the 1950s to the 1990s. And she was a woman among men at this institution, an artist among scientists. And the coherence of this single life imposes a specific set of episodes on the otherwise vast history of graphic design in the 20th century, and intersects with various movements. So, for example, she designed the still standard tome dedicated to the Bauhaus, this utopian institution, which she did in 1969, and it gives us occasion to look back at historical avant-gardes and use this both as primary and secondary material. She designed the book Learning from Las Vegas, which grew out of a studio in 1968 here at Yale, in which students were taken to Las Vegas to study the city. I don't really think they do things like that anymore, but it was the kind of genesis of research, architectural research. So we look at pop and postmodernism in the context of this book as both form and content. Cooper taught at MIT in the Department of Architecture. She taught hands-on production and pedagogy, which the discussion of which allows us to look at the way we're learning today. and her work extends into software in the 1990s and so into the present. So I wanted to sort of make these couple arguments for why we do what we do in this class. And the first is very simple, and it's to give a grounding, a set of shared references for a room full of students who are often new to this country, new to Yale, new to this material, and give ways to talk about this material, a kind of vocabulary. To look at the design as an index of intellectual and cultural history, as a mass medium and where politics is never very far away. And the second major reason is to look at a set of precedents, to offer a simple historical awareness. Graphic design has always been in some ways sort of postmodern and historically intensive. Typefaces and letter forms have vestiges of the calligraphic strokes and of the history of the printing technology, even when they appear on screen. And we could parse the Yale logo if we wanted to in that same way. It's a practice in which images are circulating, and it's long been a paragon of someone like Lawrence Lessig would call remix culture. So history is really deeply inside of it. It relates to the recent show at MoMA called The Forever Now, Contemporary Painting in an Atemporal World. This practice has always been atemporal, and yet we do history. And we do it because there's a sense of what is possible within it, and acknowledging the force of historical change. The change of styles in the formal, certainly. Changes in ways of seeing and perceiving as well. We're looking for the class. We're looking at Every Building on the Sunset Strip by Ed Ruscha here. But also the possibility of changing roles and relationships. And understanding that this field, like any of the ones here today, is not fixed in the relationships it has to society, to the so-called client, to others, and that it can be redefined. That we can unearth in this history artists, provocateurs, publicists, researchers. Indeed, we're doing a lot of research here. So I wanted to kind of reframe the binary with which we started and say that perhaps we're doing search and research, search via research, search as research. And to the extent that this field is changing and is changing the relationships possible and not accepting them as a given, I think it's really happening here with a really brilliant and diverse and engaged set of students. And that for me is hugely inspiring. Thank you.